as a pastor, one of the things that I'm called to do and need to do is to listen. Is to listen clearly, is to listen deeply. And one of the things that has happened with me is I happen to just like listen all the time. So if I'm walking around in the streets, I hear things that I didn't used to hear just because I've become a pastor and become conditioned to listening to just about everything that goes around me. And in the past few weeks, there's been a lot of stuff that I've just picked up in the air, people talking about, either people talking to me or just around, about this idea of judging and judgment. Just the other day, someone was in my office and I made a comment, and they said, gosh, that sounds awfully judgy to me. And I wasn't offended, and I think they were surprised that I didn't say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, because I meant exactly what I said. Then there was somebody else at the supermarket, and there was something going on, and we both noticed it, and I was going to say something, and they were like, don't say anything, that's none of your business. I said, well, I'm not sure that's how I see it, and they're like, look, what's important is just to be a good person, right? You don't have to get into other people's business. Then a third person, this was online, this is always fun, right? And they were beating up on somebody from a group that we tend to defend here. I'm not going to say exactly what it was, but they were beating up. And so I called them out for being inconsistent with the faith that they were proclaiming when they were beating this other group up. And they said, don't judge me. You don't have any right to judge me. As a matter of fact, it says in the Bible, do not judge. I said, well, yeah. I said, but it has a comma after that. And there's the rest of a sentence. And then after that sentence, there's the rest of a paragraph, and there's the rest of a chapter that gives a lot more information and a lot more context about judging. Anybody here ever wondering, like get confused about what's okay and what's not okay and what's judging about, what's judging not about? Good, because that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. And it matters because it matters for your life. It matters for your life here. It matters for the world because how we do this matters, and what we do and how we understand it matters for this life. And you don't hear me talk about this a lot, but it also matters for you in the next one. It also matters for you in the next one. So let's talk about this passage now. See what we get. Because the guy's right? When you start Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, do not judge. People are like, oh, let's just put that down and end there. Right? Doesn't make that all the syllable. But there's this comma, right? So the question is, did Jesus really mean do not judge at all? That you're just supposed to kind of stay yourself and let people do what they're going to do, and you don't criticize and you do all that and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to point to a couple things because sometimes what can happen when people do this and are using what I call the judgment card, right? And people use the judgment card as a club. See what I did right there? Here I go. So the judgment card as a club, and it's usually used in a couple different ways. One is that way that someone did to me when I went to criticize what they were doing, and they're like, don't judge me, you can't judge me, the Bible says don't judge, like as a shield, right? You use the judgment card as a shield. Other people will use the judgment card as a bludgeon. I say, I know the one right answer, I have the one right way, and there's no humility, and there's complete arrogance, and they know all the answers, and they're like, this is it, and this is how you have to behave, and this is how this has to go. So did Jesus say not to judge? It was in the part of a longer phrase and a longer set of conversation that we're about to get into. But one of the things you can be pretty sure about is this, because Jesus in in verse 5 of this same passage says, you hypocrite. What does that sound like? It sounds like judgment, right? You hypocrite. So clearly if Jesus right in the same section is casting and putting a judgment out there, it's not a statement not to judge at all. What it is, it's a statement to not, Jesus is encouraging us to not judge unfairly. That there is a standard that we are supposed to judge by because we are called to make determinations of good versus bad. We are called to not necessarily ignore everything around us. It is not that we are not called to judge. It is that we are called to not judge unfairly. Now, what's that all about? First, he is not saying to keep your mouth shut. Right? This whole thing about judging and judging fairly or unfairly, this is not Jesus saying keep your mouth shut, because that is lazy. That is lazy. Jesus continually, over and over and over again, in every gospel, practically in every chapter, is telling us to get out there and face injustice. Is telling us to get out there and correct, and he's continually correcting people's behavior that is off the mark. Particularly people's behavior on a larger scale where he's being criticized for something, but they're missing the entire heart of the message of what God is trying to tell them to do. So doing judgment fairly is not being quiet. Someone told me the other day, like I said, that, my goal is just to be a good person. As long as I'm a good person, that's adequate. Not if you're following Jesus. Not if you're following Jesus. If your standard for your life is that all I'm going to be doing, I'm going to make sure that I am a good person and not worry about the other stuff, you're following something, but you're following yourself. Right? You're following yourself. You are not following Jesus. The standard is much higher than just being a good person when you're in this faith and following this guy, Jesus. What it's really about, what Jesus is really getting about, is not judging yes or no. It's about how. It's about how we approach what we're going to do if judgment is going to be involved. It's about how we're looking at ourselves and we refine ourselves to be prepared to do that. How we approach the other person. But in addition to that, it is how we are going to be judged as well. Not just here on earth, but how we are judged when we come to face God, when we come to face Jesus at the end as our life transitions from this one to the next. And there is no avoiding that. Because we don't get to pick and choose the verses that we like about Jesus. We don't just get to say, oh, he's a good social guy, and we're going to follow him socially, but we're going to ignore all the other stuff that he said. Because if you're going to ignore all the other stuff that he said and just selectively do it, you can't take any of the other stuff seriously either. So this is about both and here. So verse 2, for with the judgment you make, this is part about the how, for with the judgment you make, you will be judged, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. We hear something similar when we said the Lord's Prayer, when we say that every week. And forgive us our trespasses. How? As we forgive those who trespass against us, which means in equal portion to. That's what that means in the original language. Forgive us in equal portion to how we treat others. It's the exact same concept, the exact same thing. So let's talk about what that means. Do I have any people who bake here? All right. Do any of you bake by weight instead? Okay, give me the hands for the people who bake by weight. Why do you do that? Why do you bake by weight instead of just like pulling some flour out of a cup and dumping it in there and saying 1 cup? You get a true measure. You get a true measure, right? You get a true measure. If you bake and you just grab some flour out of a cup and you level that cup off, you can get up to like half of what you thought you were getting. Because there are air pockets in that flour. But you can also pack it down and you can get like twice, 3 times, 4 times as much as just a scoop if you pack it in. And so Jesus is saying how you deal with other people, the measure you give. This is talking about how you treat people in the marketplace. When you're selling something or you're trading something, how do you give that measure? These 2 boxes are the same size, right? One has a lot of air in it, and one is densely packed. Which one are you doing? Are you giving generously to other people when you're doing this? Are you doing things in a manner that is from a good place in your heart? Are you doing it for other motivations? The measure you give, how you do this, and the amount that you give in that 1 cup. Are you really giving them half a cup because it's got a lot of air in there? Are you giving them like 2 cups because you've really worked at it, you've packed it down, and you're really helping them out? So the measure you give is the measure you get. Now sometimes I'll hear, gosh, I'm really scared about God's judgment. Like fair. But here's how fair God is. Here's how loving God is. Here's how reasonable God is on this judgment thing. God is so fair You get to decide. God's like, I'm not going to set the measure. You set the measure. How many people would rather God decide? Right? No. It's like you're like, right? It's all sense like, wait, I decide. That can get, You get to decide because the rules are the measure you give is the measure you get. Verse 3 and 4. John, get ready to come up here. He does not know this is coming. He did not know this was coming. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye but do not notice the log in your own eye? This gets to some of the how. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, let me take the speck out of your eye, while the log is in your own eye? John, will you come here a second? All right. I'm gonna do an eye right there. I'm gonna do an eye inspection for you. All right.
Okay.
All right. Hey, how safe do you feel right now?
Not very safe.
Not very safe. That's exactly correct. Right. So neither do I. So this is not a great thing for my eye right now. Mm-mm. Is it a good thing for your eye right now? You're not feeling comfortable at all, are you? No. Right. So there's a couple things. When I'm not dealing with my own stuff and I'm keeping this log in my eye, one, I can't see your eye at all.
Right.
Right? I can only see like one eye. What if the speck's in the other eye? Like I can't even see the speck at all. Right? But the problem is it's dangerous. It's dangerous for me and it's dangerous for you. Everybody applause for Johnny. John, wonderful job. So God is saying with this log thing, saying, look, the first thing you got to do is work on yourself. First thing you got to do is work on yourself. But you don't get to do, even though the work on yourself is a lifelong project, you don't get to say, oh, I'm not going to go deal with this other person because I'm on a lifelong self journey. Well, that's just your own spiritual problem. That's not what this is saying. It's saying before you go and interact with somebody, check yourself. Are you coming from the right motivation? Are you coming from a place of humility or a place of arrogance? Are you coming from a place of love or a place of anger? Where is it that you're coming from? Check your own eye before you go and look. And it's not saying that, look, your problems are a lot bigger than the other person's problems. It's not like saying that person's problems are nothing. How many people have had a speck in their eye? How does that feel? Hurts, right? Like it makes it difficult to see. How many of you wear contacts, and how does that feel when you get a speck in your eye?
Even worse.
Right? Even worse. I know people, and I'm not going to name names, but I know people who I have driven with who have these hard contacts. If you have the hard contacts, like not the new soft ones and all that, the hard contacts, and if a speck gets behind that hard contact, I have had someone take their hands off the wheel and say, like, drop their head to go get that out and say, take the wheel! My God! Like a speck is not necessarily a small thing. That can be dangerous for the person too. The speck, it's not saying that the log is the big thing and the speck is irrelevant. It's saying first check the things in your motivations about how you are going to approach this person and then help them. Help them, because when we correct, when we do a corrective, when we say something's out of line, yes, it may be uncomfortable, but ultimately, if it is well motivated, if we are doing it from a place of humility, it is healthy for the other person. It is healthy for the other person. So what this is saying is, look, you got your own work to do. You got to do the work. You got to focus on yourself. You got to figure this out. You got to work on this. Like, hey, some might say, wow, that's hard. Yep. But then it doesn't say, okay, you're done because you're working on your log. Don't worry about the speck in your neighbor's eye. It says, first take the log out of your own eye. Anybody remember what it says next? And then you will be able to see clearly too, so that you can take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. The work to take the log out isn't to say, you hypocrite, just work on yourself, leave them alone. It's do the work so that you are prepared to do the work to help other people. Because we are not called to stand on the sidelines. It is not good enough to just be a good person. We are called to go out and do the things that engage social injustice. We are called to go out in the individual, uncomfortable circumstances where someone needs to be corrected and do that, particularly within a community of faith. and then particularly next within the broader church. So when we see another church or another denomination like getting way out of line and beating people up and doing everything opposite from the heart of God, we are called not to be quiet, even if it's uncomfortable, even if the person's uncomfortable, when we go to them and try to take that speck out. But it's how we approach that to do that. See, Jesus doesn't say it's going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. It's not easy to work on the log. It's not easy to get yourself set to do this. And it's not easy to go to the other people and help them get that speck out or to point out they even have a speck. And to go and help them get that out. It's not easy, but it works. The world is better when we self-assess and then we don't stay in our lane, but we get out of our lane into somebody else's lane to go help them be better. And it's not always going to feel good. And they're not always going to accept it. And sometimes you're going to take the speck and they're going to put it right back in. Put another one right back in. It's not easy, but it works. And Jesus tells us that right out of the gate, 8 verses later here. It says, look, enter through the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads to destruction. This is not easy, but it is so important because it works. It works to align our hearts closer to the way of Jesus, closer to what God is asking our hearts to be, in humility and then acting in loving kindness and forgiveness and justice and mercy and working in all of these ways. And that helps us become better people, but then it helps the world because after we've prepared to do that, we go out and make a difference in an individual's lives. And then we go out and we do things for social justice and we make things better for all kinds of people. And then the other reason that's important is because when you have created that healthy measure, when you've gone out and done these things, that is the measure when you come to that day, when you stand before your God, that you can walk and hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant. Now, are you curious how to work on that log? How we can make that log go away? How we can do that? Good, because next week is going to be Rise to Curiosity. Amen.